Russell Gregory, speaking April 8th, 1973.
Not much is going to happen
Right.
until you internally, or me, or anybody else, has so slowed down that it's possible for the new kind of excitement, the new kind of pace of the year, the root of the sun. There was recently a squib in the New York Times quoting a lady from a town of 256 people or some such number in Kentucky. And the remark she made to the reporter was, it was late, it was in the daytime, late in the afternoon, or early in the afternoon. She said, "The sun's broken over the mountain. I know that spring is here now." She said, "For all my life, when it gets to a certain point and finally breaks over the mountain, I know." That's a whole lifetime to find out precisely what the season is.
Right.
A whole lifetime. I'm not sure there's anything any more important.
Me neither.
Okay. But it takes a long time for you or for me or for anybody who's lived, whether we like it or not, on the general trope and the general hyper stimulus of traffic going incessant, movement, novelty, activity, to clear our heads and say, when the corn sprouts, the corn sprouts. It'll finally break the ground, it'll a lot of weeds and raccoon in the meantime, and eventually there'll be sweet corn. It's a whole concept of patience that, Michael, we both know about abstractly, even would to greater or lesser degree know personally,
Right.
and that it's just unmitigated hell to relearn and reintegrate into one's existence. I don't only not think it's an avoidance, I think it's perhaps the most positive kind of challenge that one can face.
Now that's a very positive statement to me.
And it seems to me that that's what it is all about. They're just, look, I noticed that you recently did, I've got a new pair of shoestrings too. My Easter
I
outfit.
need one terrible.
Well, okay, but it's my Easter outfit.
Right.
And it seems to me that's kind of nice. And I got a letter the other day from Gary Snyder, a short letter. He said, I'm leaving tomorrow for Portland and then Missoula. And one of the things he was saying in it was that Lloyd Reynolds, who was a famous handwriting teacher, calligraphy teacher at Reed College, and everybody that went to Reed took his class, they all write something like I do, better mostly. But all the people that went there have this family likeness in their handwriting. Reynolds had just recently sent him a batch turkey quills, and he wanted to trim one up to use it. So he had got some splots on the paper. And my impression was that city. And of course, we think about theater, and we think about the dance, publishing, and poetry readings, and galleries and such like, and we tend to think of New York or one of the other larger cities. Boston, favorite name for itself, is the hub of the universe. And for maybe 100 years it seemed true. The only thing is that there is something different in knowing how not to get mugged and being able to tell me, if you can remember on your way out here, which trees are most progressed in terms of their buds. There isn't a goddamn funnier thing to me about St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, and the fact it's surrounded by harlequin bark sycamores. Do you know why they're harlequin bark sycamores? They're there because they have a very high tolerance for whatever it is New Yorkers are breathing, mostly each other, when they're there. What's interesting is that by tradition, the sycamore has evil connotations and is a tree the church has never really liked, so they find themselves on the horns of a dilemma. 93% of North America lives in urban areas. All of a sudden they discover the price of hamburger is $1 and whatever it is a pound. They're going to have a meat boycott. That's good. They are all very unhappy because they can't get cheap food. Even at that, the average American spends a smaller portion of his income for food than any other industrialized country. And lately, of course, food's become a very big deal. There are probably more reinvented or invented rituals surrounding it than any other thing that I can think of offhand, with the possible exception of dope. The rituals there are mostly odious because I've never run into a dope freak that wasn't a missionary. But it too is a long way from process. It's one thing buying a lid from somebody else that just sort of bought it from somebody else that bought it from somebody else and growing your own. And I think then there are a lot of other things. But the whole point is process. And unless you like the idea that getting 250,000 or 900,000 or however many million commuters in and out of the island every day, and you think that constitutes kind of process, and in fact it does, that's sufficiently enchanting for you. The goddamn parakeets are gone wild, so the songbirds can't nest in the New York, Connecticut, Long Island area anymore because people kept birds. Now they've got to do in the parakeets, which the Audubon Society is going to agree to keep its mouth shut about because they know the parakeets are keeping all the songbirds from nesting, and anyway nobody knows if the eggs are going to hatch because of DDT. And it's a very long way from process. Somebody's called, for example, the island a city of towers, and it surely is that. And there's something very tedious at one level, if you've lived all your life in an urban area, waiting for a season to change. We had 2 days in March early on in the 60s, and everybody was unzippered and unbuttoned and dreaming of sandcastles. And then we got a really heavy snow. And the people where I work were vastly amused, but not in the best sense of it, by the fact that I not only didn't object to the snow, I had a name for it. It's poor man's fertilizer. A late March snow, a heavy late March snow, wet, sloppy, nasty, is always called poor man's fertilizer in the country. And that is implicit, at least, of process and of growing. The desire to want to is one thing, but one of the prerogatives of getting past 40 is candor. And I'll tell you, it is, as Gary Snyder says, not enough to want to grow vegetables. We have to learn how to grow vegetables. And it's a long damn job. Those who grow up knowing it are never conscious of having learned it. Those who have to learn it are in a discipline at least as complicated as let's say, the most sophisticated kind of yoga that they've just packaged and exported in some 15-year-old guru from Tibet. And maybe more rigorous in the long run because it doesn't end. It does have its own way of the cycle of repeating itself. Either you don't have eggplant next year or aubergine. So my own sense of place, having lived quite a long time in Ann Arbor, when it was still a small town, there was a courthouse square shat upon by pigeons and sat around by drunks. It was somewhat... they cleared the first one out to get rid of the street people. Now they don't know what to do. They can't clear the streets out to get rid of the street people. And it's changed over from a somewhat small and sleepy college town dominated I can remember when the VFW was the most important fraternity on campus, Beta Theta Weta. It's where Soybean Cellar now is, which is an interesting genealogy for the building. Considerable food for thought. Pardon?
The drink downstairs.
Oh, sure. It used to be the thing where everybody was going to try their spurs to get into before it was legal. So there are clearly changes that in my time and certainly also in Michael's time, and we have a certain common fund of experience here in Ann Arbor that we've seen. It has its own way of being very comfortable, and it's had its own way of being a comfortable place for those of us who in some instances like to think, whether true or not, we were waiting for the world to catch up with us. I don't know that it's true. I think we like to think that. And necessary to think that, perhaps. But at any rate, I never have severed, and certainly have no way or want or desire to sever my connections with a very large and continuingly large and prolific family who live along, or most of them live along. I have 7 siblings, all of them younger, and there's a stretch of road where, starting with a bar and restaurant running that one of my brothers owns. He's my brother. Actually, I call him my nephew's father most of the time. Alliances are funny even in families. They cut across age lines and relation lines frequently in a tribe. To my parents, and then there are 3 or 4 more of them. They all kind of live along the road. So my dad calls the strip of road Gregoryville, and it's almost true. It's pretty funny, but it's almost true. And my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and so on have lived there for a long time. So there's a way in which a better commodity than money, which I don't think any of us have ever had any, is being identified as a member of a tribe. To illustrate, about 2 years ago, I took some friends of mine from London up on the 2nd day of March. It was a fairly early spring that year, and sap had started running over the weekend. So Leon, one of the neighbors of my father's, had gone back to Sugar Bush and started putting spiles in and tapping the trees the day before, and it started boiling down about noon on the Sunday. So we got there 3 o'clock. It was after dinner, slogging through 40 rods of mud because both of the tractors were back there. And I walked in, and Leon's mother, who was slightly older than my parents, was in the sugar bush, and his wife and all the kids, and the sap was boiling up, and I walked in. Dad says, "Oh, you don't have to let them know you're coming. Just walk back onto the woods." So I did, and I walked in, and she says, "Well, I don't know which one you are, but you got to be the old man's grandson." And she was referring in that instance to my father. So one of the things that's involved in a sense of place
is label, a tribal label. They know who you are, assuming that you don't deviate greatly from a general kind of family appearance and norm. I suppose from the way I walk or the way I talk, forehead, I don't know what it is, nose, demeanor, who knows? They just simply know when you walk in you belong to the tribe. That's part of a sense of place. If you find it oppressive, and I suspect for many people it can be, it's no place to go. She was referring to my grandfather, who was born in 1865. He died when I was 29 in 1959. He was 94. And he'd been the old man for 20 years that I can remember. He was always sort of, that was the old man. No disrespect involved, but that was the way it was. Now there also, along with being a member of a tribe, is you have certain tribal kinds of responsibilities, and there are expectations. And there are even stories that you gather. Harold Bennett's something of a local and therefore a miniature politician, friend of my family, and one of the pieces of Bennett property abuts a part of my father's. He's the youngest of a family. His oldest brother is the better part of 82 or 3 and has lived as a hermit in his own woods since 1926 or 7. Everybody knows it who lives there. He certainly isn't anybody that they want visitors to go and see. It's no shrine. He lives in his woods. He's a hermit. He's had a succession of dogs. Brilliant shot. My father says the only man he ever saw kill a mouse with a .22 pistol when the mouse was running across the floor. That's brilliant shooting by any standards. But Amon, his name is Amon, A-L-M-O-N-D. He's lived back in the woods for a long time. He likes it. And I one time asked my dad about why he thought Amon lived back there. He says, oh, I don't know. He says he likes it. Besides, he was always a little bit different. But no impatience, no intolerance. But they're local. They belong there, in that place. They've lived there all their lives. So what they'll tolerate is for example, in that location, is an enormous degree of eccentricity, so long as it has some kind of a handle, some kind of a label, some kind of how you fit in, where you belong, what you are. I've got a good friend who lives in a terribly exotic apartment building, and literally, she and her 2 children have to get by, and I swear, she was on the phone, she told me, it's 3 months ago, she only has $2,000 a week alimony to hump along on. And I just cracked up. And the real consternation was, did I think that she could find a safe place to live in Ann Arbor? And I said, what do you mean safe? And she says, people are getting mugged on the streets around my apartment building. And they have to keep, guards and keys and buzzes and all that bullshit. Bullshit. Okay, it's a long way from process. The tribal label can be a bore if you're out trying to do something that you'd rather other people didn't know you were doing, like coon watermelon or something like that. But by and large, it's also a measure of insurance. Because the fact that they sort of know who you are. It'd be easy for me to get a check cashed there. Small item. But you have an identifiable kind of entity. If it labels you, it also tends then to put you in an operative position. You can do things. And that's part of what place means. My various and sundry wanderings around the country, I think I hitchhiked first on the Pennsylvania Turnpike before it was all done. So it was a long time ago. And I remember ending up at about 5 o'clock in the morning in a little town called New Hope, Pennsylvania, which has a proto-cathedral. I don't think it's any longer a true cathedral because the diocese has moved its headquarters or some such. And it was the only place open. So I waited till about 6 o'clock when a local bakery opened up and you could get rolls and coffee there. And then eventually I went, I could get back on the road and hitchhike again over. I don't even know if I could retrace the route now, and certainly have no desire to go on into the city. I think it was my first visit there, and I believe it was the fall or the summer of 1950. And the thing that astonished me all the way along then, and I think it was still substantially true, is that the people that were picking me up were frequently, pickups and things like that. I wasn't in any hurry. Pickups, and they sort of passed you on. I got a ride with a state trooper once through the same trip through Kentucky, and he was delivering state papers to another post. He called ahead on his magic radio, and they said, yeah, we've got somebody going on toward the east end of the state. So he said, well, have him wait 20 minutes, I'll be in. I got a man, I give him a ride. So they got me a ride. I've never in my life ridden in a police car except that. And they just keep passing you on. But the curious way, the thing, it seems to me, is that they legitimate themselves and their relationship with you with certain kinds of questions. Or the way you ask questions. Or what you ask questions about, possibly. Sometimes it was tough last summer breaking the ice. There were 5 of us who went west camping. And it was some areas I'd never been in before. And my 12-year-old, he's now 13-year-old nephew was there, and he was perhaps the biggest single factor we had going for us, because people that travel with boys normally can't be all bad. This is the way the mind seems to operate. Besides which, he has the opportunity then, when we're on a couple of reservations, of meeting other boys, and substantially there's a way in which they're splendidly alike for all their differences. But that's kind of a difficult group, and we were kind of around. A mix of long hairs and short hairs and so on. But the way I managed to get lots of people to talk to us would be to pick out the man that's got the right kind of hands, and then ask him why there weren't any Morgan horses out there. I've never yet gotten a successful answer, but they all seemed to agree it was a pretty good and a legitimate question. Because they not only knew what Morgans were, they knew that there weren't many of them. And it is an interesting question, why a nice 1000 horse with demonstrable hill abilities, capable of running a light rig, one horse plow or one horse harrow, a good horse for women, immensely sensible. Why the Morgan was never popular out west, I don't know. But it's a good question. It's a good opening gambit. Eventually they see, well, he may be an outlander. He's from away from here. But he's not all bad. At least he knows about horses. I really don't know that much about horses. I can't tell their age. My dad can by looking at their mouth. But they know at least you're not as likely to rip them off if you're asking that kind of a front-end question. I've seen a lot of city people. I genuinely like them. Mostly I feel sorry for them. And there are lots of hot shots. I'm sure some rube is still going into New York City and being sold the bridge, or one of the bridges. But I find that in the long run, the hardest people and the sternest and the best and the most interesting bargainers are probably farmers. I want to tell you one local story. I haven't written it yet, but I'm going to. We have an omnipresent interstate system all over North America. Because I suppose we have the cars, therefore the roads have to expand to provide for the cars, and the concrete industry or cement industry is interested anyway. It's ruined an immense amount of acreage, but they're there now. And off all the exits, they plant these uniform plastic restaurants, franchises. They all look alike. Near an exit not far from my parents' house, horns, I think, and I believe they're owned by Greyhound. Sort of a vested interest kind of proposition. The people who had the local franchise were from Grand Rapids, 35 miles away. And the little thing is going up. They bring the parts out and they put it all together. You can't heat the goddamn things in the winter, and they're all shiny. Even the food's shiny. Even the people are shiny. But they're driving out all autumn. They want to open up in the spring. The constructions go, or whatever it is, they pour a slab, and it's going on all autumn, and these people have got probably their entire lifetime savings that they want to multiply. They're going to get rich, and they drive out nearly every day to watch. It's 30 miles, and they drive out nearly every day to watch. And they realize where the sign announcing what they are, which isn't supposed to be there anyway, but they notice that where the sign is, there are trees in front of it. And when the goddamn trees have leaves again in the spring, it'll obscure their sign, and nobody will stop and buy their shiny food in their shiny restaurant from their shiny people. So the thing to do, therefore, is to get rid of the trees, not move the sign. So they stopped at the local standard station, asked Bill Black, asked Bill who owned that property along there. He told him Don Seiler did. So they wanted to know if he could tell them where Don Seiler lived. He said, why, hell yes. So he points it off to them. They all point. He points, tells him where to turn. The guy goes up, drives in. He and his wife get out, knock. Don Seiler comes out, hickory stripe overalls, the kind of paunch that belongs because it isn't flabby, and a cigar. My father's cigar is just sort of a manifestation of his personality. It's not a cigar, it's just got to be there. And they explain to him who they are, and that they want to know if maybe he'd like to sell those trees, or he'd consent to sell them. He said, yes, he allows how he would. Well, how much did he want for them? Well, in that case, since they were off there at the edge of that field, he'd just soon they set the price. So they talk a minute, and the guy says, well, how would $75 a piece be? He says, all right. He says, now for that, will you draw them away if we get them cut down? Don says, sure, I'll get them drawn away. I got a tractor, we can get out there with a manure spreader anyway and draw them off. Okay. So the lady went to the car and wrote the check out, $150. They were Dutch elm and hadn't had leaves in 2 years. So they set their price, they made their bargain. I don't think there was anything wrong with it. He let them do it. Caveat emptor. I'd try a lot of things, but I'd never try to outdeal those people, whether it's a deacon calf or a dead tree. That, too, is a sense of place. Of course Don knew they were dead trees. I think I've got his signature in my pocket. I believe he was chairman of the draft board at the time I was drafted, if I'm not mistaken. It's another thing, you always know people that are in the draft board, who they are, whether or not they hid behind a cow during World War II and so on. So that's a tribal label too. You know those things. That's place. And you find it wherever you go. I suspect you even find it in cities. It seems to me it's less discernible and takes a great deal more effort. It becomes less personal because you are less involved in processes, which processes are the same that other people are also engaged in. I remember taking my friend Norman Nordhauser, who's now a professor of history at Southern Illinois University, with me to the Grange dinner on New Year's Day. Thanksgiving is for family, or in-laws, really. Christmas is for family, and New Year's is neighborhood. And they always have a New Year's dinner at the Grange Hall. which everybody brings stuff for. So we drove up from Ann Arbor for it. He was working on his dissertation at the time, and he was back here. He got up there and he was gaga because he said there were 17 kinds of pie. Well, I think he exaggerates, but he's always talking about going where they had 17 kinds of pie. So you've got local commitments and local activities. Within limits, you both have to have a sense of humor and a sense of patience. When old lady Bennett went buggy, Harold's grandmother went buggy, she used to get out of the house, and she was really bedridden part of the time, everything else, and somebody'd find her running across the field or down the road in her nightgown, and they'd just stop and pick up Grandma Bennett and take her back home. But she wasn't institutionalized, which maybe is a local point, but it has another way and a sense of place. They don't institutionalize people to the same degree they do here. Maybe in the case of real violence. Well, they eventually had to. Roy Smith, he went out and bought 600 pounds of nails on one occasion, called up a contractor and told him to come out and nail anything. He really went over the bend. Nobody really did anything till he ran the tractor in the creek and left it there. Then they decided maybe they ought to worry about it a little bit. And he did get kind of violent, so they restrained him, but they brought him back home after a little bit anyway. There is that tendency of people, if to be nosy, also to look out or look after other people in the neighborhood nearby. Neighborhood's even a flexible term. Integration, as far as I can see, it's always worked. There's nearly every, if there's a predominant Anglo-Saxon element in the names, it seems to me that it's never been very oppressive, and it sure as hell isn't all there is. They're always, and everybody that, as far as I can tell, that wants to live there has been able to. I don't know that very many people want to. I suspect that the political lines are a little bit more firmly drawn. It's hard to find very many avowed Democrats, but on the other hand, the county is no longer consistently a safe county for the Republicans either. Only because the fact they don't avow that they are, but they'll frequently vote that way. Enormous amount of ticket crossing, ticket splitting, or whatever they call it. So I'm not even sure it's so routinized that way. It's much harder now to find really splendid farm cooks than it used to be, men or women, because as the machinery in the farm or on the farm agriculturally has increased, they've had a corresponding increase of machinery inside of houses, and the more machinery you have in general, the less good is food preparation or preservation. That's at least my experience. Some of the best cooks that I know there, by the way, have always been men, not women, which is a very interesting thing, that at the point where processes are performed, far fewer jobs tend to be sex differentiated. We had a nanny goat when I was young for my brother who had eczema, and they put them on goat's milk diet then, for what reasons I don't know. But when the goat had to be milked obviously twice a day. But when my mother was in the barn, she wouldn't let my dad milk her. But if Dad was the only one in the barn, or Dad and one of us kids, then she didn't object. But the goat wouldn't let Dad milk her if her mother was there. I think that's pretty smart of that old goat, but after all, my dad's hands weren't anywhere near as comfortable as my mother's. But from milking or looking after youngsters or raising food or food preparation, cooking, certain kind, my mother did not butcher because it's a little awkward for a woman to hoist a carcass up in a block and tackle in a tree or elsewhere. But in general, but she did do a lot of the other things, drive tractor and so on. And my father is perfectly capable of doing a lot of things. My mother says he's a little sloppy, but does. So I don't think the sex differentiated roles that we always are getting kind of clutchy about in various places was ever very operative where life that I knew it, at least in farm families, was concerned. I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. I have a brother, for example, who's a professional cook, who is always very careful to explain that he'll never be as good as my mother is, for whatever it's worth. I think there it's just a matter of if the task needs to be done, then whoever's hands are idle at the time does it, and I don't think much thought is given to role in the usual sense of the word. I think in the long run it tends probably to make people feel more confident because they have exposure to a wider range of activities. But I don't want to generalize about it beyond that point. I just like the fact that those distinctions didn't exist too much. Certain kinds of customs and regularities preoccupy me a good deal. I was home a year ago at Decoration Day, which isn't Memorial Day in the country, it's still called Decoration Day. And that's the day the Cemetery Association meets. The Cemetery Association is sort of automatic membership if you have a lot in the cemetery. Anybody that has a lot belongs to it. I think you get charged also like $5 a year or something, and that takes care of all the care. It used to be $3, and I think they had to face inflation and $5. It went to $5. They meet every Memorial Day morning, about 10 o'clock, at the cemetery. Everybody arrives, and that's where the meeting is. Well, I've gone off and on to them for 40 years, and it just struck me last time I was there that some of it was kind of interesting and maybe kind of important. So I wrote about it. Decoration Day. In an early spring, the lilacs, even the double-blossomed ones, are gone. In a late spring, they bloom along the road and at the gates. Mother pots and preens, geraniums, coleus, petunias, and trailing ivy. Nice, thrifty plants, she says, her hands remembering, moving in a way unlike any other day all year. A year has many ways. Her hands perform them all. Bring that pail for watering the urn. I hope it doesn't turn so hot the plants don't get a good start and get cooked to pieces. And bring a jar on the porch to leave, so I can water it through the summer, going back and forth to town. Cemetery Association meeting, 10 a.m. Neighbors, mostly. Others, long known but seldom seen, who've moved away. All meet and talk among the graves and at the pump. Quiet, low-voiced, but smiling, not sad. The family place may be in other hands, fallen to ruin, or just some cellar stones. They'll all return at last and leave no more. This place stands for coming home. The men in felt hats and overalls, but not Sunday. But Sunday, not chambray shirts. A meat adjustment to the day. They'll drill corn in the afternoon, or stretch twine for garden rows. It's not a holiday, a day off, not Thanksgiving or opening of deer season, and they'd insult the farmer dead if they behaved as if it were. You do the fitting thing by getting on with work. The season has demands the dead remember in their earth. Little flags, new and bright, marked soldier, sailor, pilot berths of those the government sent home, have been renewed and bleached in summer sun since battles at Buena Vista, Anzio, the Aragon, and Bull Run. These flags mark the sweet succession of the rest. Mother softly says, in a war, nobody wins. No plastic flowers or wreaths, Dad says. I'd rather have a big bull thistle than plastic flowers here where anything just about will grow. If you look after it at all, bring plastic to put over me and I'll raise right up and get you. Your dad always puts a little fertilizer in the urn on a day he waters it, and you never saw such a mess of stuff. It grows so I have to trim it, pinch it back. Granddad used to do the same, and what do you expect of a farmer? There's a lot you have to understand. Toward the end, Granddad would stay in the car and open the door, push it with his cane, turn toward the lot, take off his hat, and look. It seemed good to him to know where he would finally rest, and someone else would cut the weeds. Burdock and yellow rocket were the devil for him. Unclean fence rows, another name for hell. Grandmother had come on ahead. Once Perry was helping the sexton. Mr. Bennett said, "You never knew your grandma. Died too long ago. She was a good woman, a real good woman," and let it go at that. Perry liked hearing it. Mr. Bennett's family lies a couple of rows away. Perry says it, recalls what he said, living in the rich loam of the dead. And we will bring our parents every year when they grow old. You're never old so long as parents live and you know where their parents lie. 3 generations, back or ahead, counting yourself as one, are about all you can know. The rest is history, kept by earth. After that, given good succession of the years, I'll fix the urns and water them in summer. The stone, plain red granite cut with the family word, does not change. We register each year by it. It keeps time, theirs and ours. There's a rightness in the day. Cemetery meeting in the morning, plant garden in the afternoon. Well, I can't get much more local than that, even if I tried. And in a certain other sense, all due respect to other people who have written about April and lilacs and other times of year, I don't think you can get any more universal. Because one of the great things that's at issue in the Old Testament is the sacredness of where the people lie buried and how they return to certain sites to inter succeeding dead. And one of the great claims that Chief Seattle made was that he could not sell some land. You did not sell the land where your fathers was buried. And although we've conventionalized it and made it cemeteries here, it seems to me in Michigan, because of the nature of the land and the fact that we invented geometry so they could lay the country out in square grids, although of course God didn't know geometry and didn't lay it out that way. It seems to me very much the same thing. Forms or expressions, surfaces, which should engage us all, normally don't vary so much, but they vary more even then than the substance of whatever it is that's underneath. And I know that there are 6 or 8 unused lots in the grave, so I really are on the grave sites on the lot, so if something were to happen to me tomorrow, I'm perfectly aware right at this moment precisely where they would put me. It's a kind of security, even at that. It's not even grisly. It's like knowing that eventually that's where they put you. I find it very comforting, very interesting, and not at all macabre or sad. It seems to me it's a good thing to know. I don't recommend that you go right out and buy cemetery lots. I'm not even certain that I necessarily approve of all of our somewhat vulgar burial customs and displays. But I'm not in charge of all of them, and about some things you can't tell other people what to do. And it suits a good many of them. So, to some extent, one of the most important things in life is to have the right to be let alone. And if I want to think differently, they won't interfere with that, and I ought not interfere with their peculiar cosmetic approach to burial. So I don't. But at least it seems to me there's a nice continuity. The cemetery is about 1.5 miles from a 40-acre plot that my dad and mother own. And it's therefore about 1.5 miles from the schoolhouse where my niece goes to school, a one-room country school. Well, you've all had many remarkable occurrences in your life, but I think it's rare that any of you went to a school that your grandfather went to. And she, in fact, is. So, in a sense, place is also probably, for somebody, inseparable from roots. I really like thinking about the fact that Julie's going to school where her granddad went. She isn't the only kid in school, in that school, and I think they've got 17 of them altogether. They have a wonderful time. They went on the last run that one of the local trains made. They just had a wonderful time. It's a great place to go to school. Open classroom? There's only one room. How can it not be open? I spent the first 9 years of my kindergarten, the first 8 grades in a one-room country school. I didn't know what they were talking about when they started talking about the open classroom. Push back the desks. We moved them every day sometimes. So you see, the sense both of freedoms, if you're circumscribed at some levels, it's better if you don't, get too drunk and drive off the road or kill somebody's cow or something like that. You're circumscribed within limits. But then once those are either tolerated or accepted or at least recognized, then within that it seems to me the local provides an enormous amount of freedom and a tremendously wide range of modes for expression as far as I can tell. One of the most exciting artists that I know or have ever met is a woman by the name of Gertrude Dolly, whose jars of preserved foods seem to be to rank with Vassarelli at his best. And besides, they're edible.